I know you're not. Pero vale la pena. Todos me dicen que vale la pena, pero creo que algunos no. Three stars. No, yeah, 3 stars.
All right, vámonos.
Okay.
Where's my mouse? It's over there. All right. Okay.
Okay. Okay, I'm shorter, so. Good evening, everyone. Can everybody hear me okay? Yes? Guess the interwebs too. Thank you for joining us. My name is Alexon Pascual. I'm an associate professor of Spanish contemporary literature and new media here at UC Berkeley, where I teach digital literature and arts. And Misha's work is always in my syllabus. Just okay. Anyways, I'm also an executive committee member at the Berkeley Center for New Media, and I'm also the graduate student advisor at that place. So, hello. I am thrilled to welcome you to this evening's talk by Micha Cárdenas, Afterman, Alterhuman Ethics and Poetics at the Climate Change Tipping Point. But before, I have some quick lengthy reminders. The Berkeley Center for New Media, the BCNM, is an interdisciplinary research center that studies and shapes media transition. Can you hear this? Echoish? Like sound? I hear it's an amazing sound right now, actually. But that studies and shapes media transition and emergence from diverse perspectives. Through critical thinking and making, we cultivate technological equity and fairness in our classrooms, our communities, and of course, the internet. We recognize that the BCNM is located in the territory of the Huichin, the ancestral and unceded lands of Sochenyo-speaking Ohlone peoples, specifically the confederated villages of Lishan. The history of prolific technological development of this region has always depended and will always depend on this land. And all of our technological infrastructures and activities take place on and in relation to this land now and forever. We commit to supporting the sovereignty and stewardship of this place by Ohlone peoples through building long-term reciprocity and relationships with tribal leaders and organizations. Tonight's event, our first in person of the spring semester. Hello, 2024. is part of the long-running Arts, Technology, and Culture Colloquiums. Funded by Professor Ken Goldberg in 1997, the ATC Lecture Series is an internationally respected forum for creative ideas. Always free of charge and open to the public, the series is coordinated by BCNM and has presented over 200 artists, writers, and critical thinkers who question assumptions and push boundaries at the forefront of art, technology, and culture. Tonight's event is also part of our inaugural Latinx and Latin American Media Ecology Series, a program we launched last semester, aiming to spotlight Latinx and Latin American media makers, institutions, and new media developments and opportunities and challenges specific to Latinx and Latin American communities. BCNM's efforts to elevate and amplify the work of historically underrepresented communities in the new media space also manifest through our Indigenous Technologies program, which engages questions of technology and new media in relation to global structures of indigeneity, settler colonialism, and genocide in the 21st century. Our Indigenous Technologies events and ongoing conversations with Indigenous scholars and communities aim to critically envision and reimagine what a more just and sustainable technological future can look like. This summer, for the first time, we're offering a 6 weeks Indigenous Technologies online workshop where participants will have the opportunity to learn from prominent Indigenous scholars, artists, and practitioners addressing topics such as Indigenous representation, film, Indigenous futurisms, the land back and rematriation movement, environmentalism, and Indigenous food systems. Guiding our course discussions is our own Sierra Ed, a PhD student in ethnic studies, in the ethnic studies department, and also our coordinator in the Indigenous Technologies program. Please visit newmedia.academy to sign up and get more information. I also want to take a moment to thank our generous co-sponsor for tonight's event, the Center for Science, Technology, Medicine, and Society, CSTMS, as well as our host here, the Social Science Matrix, UC Berkeley's flagship institute for social science research, supporting cross-disciplinary research pursued by social scientists across Berkeley campus and beyond. And now, to introduce tonight's amazing speaker, Dr. Professor Artist Micha Cárdenas is an artist and associate professor of critical race and ethnic studies and performance, play and design at the University of California, Santa Cruz, where she directs the Critical Realities Studio. Her book, Poetic Operations, published by Duke University Press in 2022, won the Gloria Anzaldúa Book Prize for the National Women's Studies Association. This book, if you haven't read it, which you should, proposes interesting things. Proposes that algorithms can be, as intersectionality and assemblages have been, a powerful way of figuring complex processes of identity and expression and oppression by providing another model, one with infinitely more operations and elements. Not only an academic author, but also a novelist. Oh my God, my book is in there. I was going to show it. Well, I'll bring it out later. Cárdenas has explored multiplicity and multiversality in her recent published cyberpunk novel, Atoms Never Touch. Cárdenas is an artist theorist winner of many prizes and special mentions for her digital artwork, most recently for works like Oceanic and Saint Sol. But I also want to mention a hypermedia narrative that is a favorite of mine. It's called Redshift Metal. You should check it out. She's also a winner of the 2022 Anonymous was a Woman Artist Award, the 2020 Impact Award at the Indicated Festival, and the 2016 Creative Award for the Gender Justice League. Her solo and collaborative artworks have been presented in museums, galleries, and biennials, including Outfest Fusion, Tangle Arts Disability in Toronto, Transmediale in Berlin, the Alt CPH Copenhagen Biennial, the Stamps Gallery in Arbor, the Thessaloniki Biennial. I mean, very achieved. Cárdenas is also a member of the artistic collective Electronic Disturbance Theater 2.0, where together with Ricardo Dominguez, Brett Stolbaum, and Sarah Carroll and El Merman, English, created the groundbreaking transported immigrant tool. Cárdenas is a first generation Colombian American. And in her talk tonight, and you will really, I will stop talking very soon. Cárdenas will take a systemic global approach to respond to the challenges facing humanity, following Sylvia Wynter and asking if humanity is coming to an end, or if it has already ended, or if it ever was. Looking at contemporary art and global art exhibitions in the time of COVID-19 and accelerating climate catastrophe, she asks what the role is for art and the humanities at a time in which many have asked if we are seeing the horizon of humanity. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to micha Cárdenas.
Okay, I tested this morning, so I'm taking this off. You can hear me better. Where's my mouse? I have my things on screen over here, so I'm going to awkwardly manage the slides. Thank you so much for that introduction. Thank you so much to the organizers. Thanks to everyone for coming. I really appreciate you being here. I do that. Yeah, glad we did that. Okay. Let's start here. It's hard for me to think about anything but Rafah right now and Gaza. What could I say that could be useful in a genocide? But I will try to say something. I have been changing my work and writing to be more focused on Palestine and Gaza in the last 125 days of genocide. So I do feel like it is something that I can do to contribute. So we'll hear some parts of that and parts of this new book that I'm writing that Alex mentioned, and see some artwork and hear from one of my collaborators who also was here. Tammy, what's up? Okay. So yeah, this is the question that I've been thinking about since 2021 and the attempted eviction of Sheikh Jarrah in Jerusalem and the subsequent attacks then. Thinking about this idea from Sylvia Wynter that the primary issue that is at the core of many global problems, including climate change and violence and many issues, is this definition of the human and the limits of that definition and the way the human has been used as a weapon. And then this happened with the Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant calling Palestinians human animals, a perfectly clear statement of genocidal intent. So it is what I'm focusing on. So after 75 years of occupation, after 15 years of siege, and the attack on October 7th, then Yoav Gallant says this. And then, as we all know, 27 to 30,000 people murdered, over 11,000 children. So I've been thinking about this ceasefire cento from Mossab Abu Toha. I'll read some of that to get us started. We all long to write the poem that will stop this death. All I ask is time, blank time. So this was written by Mossab Abu Toha and many lines from other collaborators. All I ask is time, blank time, some rest from frenzy, breathing room, till my fate can teach my beaten spirit how to grieve. The wall dissolves, a man sits in the rubble of his house, weeping for his children. And my dream for the children of Palestine is that they are free to run and laugh in the streets bathed in love. Brooklyn Sky Hospital child in my arms, so new, unbroken, blue with life in Palestine. Children watch the sky, watch life break, 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 break. What to do with all this breath, but think of them and speak. Comfortable knowing that the plane flying overhead holds passengers of the sky is a privilege we all deserve. Never again happens again and again. Allowing genocide to happen is horrific. The death toll climbs, numbers so vast I can't even picture them. We want to live. You wailing a grief that will never end, grief as long as the curving river, as deep as the salted sea. You typing feverishly into the night, writhing to the world, the only thing to say, we are human. We are human. We are of the land. We are salt and sand and wind and blood and bone. You are who I love. So that's an excerpt from Ceasefire Santo, published on November 13th of last year. Collectively written, these lines express the grief and rage felt by so many across the world in November 2023, as Israeli Defense Forces bombed Gaza in response to their attack on October 7, 2023. These words say so much and not enough. What can be said in the face of genocide? Millions of people around the world are mobilizing to stop the genocide in Gaza, and governments around the world ignore them. I, a single person, poet, artist, scholar, long to write anything that could stop even a single death. What I am called to write is to look at the root cause, to the dehumanization of an entire people, the Palestinian people, so many other people around the world, to understand how the idea of the human has become a weapon that can facilitate genocide and mass death. My heart breaks again. My heart breaks for Gaza. My heart breaks for Sheikh Jarrah. My heart breaks for Palestine. My heart breaks for Makia Bryant, Dante Wright, for Adam Toledo. But worst of all, my heart breaks for the foster baby who has been in my care for 9 months and who's gone to live with her extended family. And from this, I write. So, here the fraught and flawed and problematic operation of comparison. But I could never know what it is like to have your baby bombed by Israel and killed. But I know something about losing a child from having my foster daughter basically taken away by the state, and his biological family gets precedence of all else. So she's alive. I got to see her. She doesn't live with me or even in the state, but by happenstance, I got to see her today. So hooray. The grief from each of these events reverberates off each other, generating an even deeper pain, but also creating constellations. The slowly unfolding tragedy of the news that our baby was leaving came just around the time of the current explosion, not current anymore, the explosion of Israeli violence against Sheikh Jarrah in Palestine, which killed 226 people in Palestine and 13 people in Israel. After being confined to staying at home for over a year due to shelter-in-place orders to prevent the spread of COVID-19, I watched with rage and grief as Palestinians in Sheikh Jarrah were being evicted from their homes by Israeli settlers, being denied the simplest human need, shelter. When they protested their evictions, they were bombed by Israeli Defense Forces. Like the author of the epigraph, when I look at my foster baby, I would think of the children of Palestine. I had been providing a home for this dear child, but in Palestine, children are having their homes stolen. As I've been protecting my foster daughter's life, children in Palestine had their lives taken by Israeli Defense Forces. I mean, how could we possibly imagine 11,000 times this happening? I wrote in my novel a bit about the feeling of losing a child and it being like the world broke, it being like the most searing pain that had ever happened ever in my whole life. I can't imagine 11,000 of those. It's clear that some children's lives matter to governments around the world. The lives of Palestinian children do not. Palestinian people are often subject to blanket racist accusations that they are terrorists as a way to justify their mass expulsion from their lands to make way for Zionist settlers to take their homes and their lands. Just in the past few days, Israeli government ministers have been encouraging Israelis to go back to Gaza and start new settlements, perfectly plainly and openly. On October 10th, 2023, the Spanish acting foreign minister, Jose Manuel Alvarez, said in a radio interview, "We cannot confuse Hamas, which is in the list of EU's terrorist groups, with the Palestinian population," imploring people to stop repeating this racist generalization. In Terracine, Salar Mameni, assistant professor of ethnic studies at UC Berkeley and art historian, states, quote, "The terrorist thus falls outside the category of the human and is an entangled fusion of the non-human, such as infectious disease or toxic landscapes, and the less than human, such as racialized bioterrorists." Mameni makes clear the ways that terrorists are defined by the war on terror and discourses of the Anthropocene as other than human, and how the terrorist is also used to delimit the boundaries of the human. This analysis extends the thinking of Edward Said on Orientalism, in which Western governments made clear through many, many documents and publications that anyone in the Orient, including anyone in the Middle East, was considered to be a lesser form of life than anyone in the Occident. Many makes the link from Orientalist rhetoric to the war on terror to articulate the racialized politics underlying the idea of the Anthropocene, our current epoch, which has been described by scientists as defined by human impacts on the world on the scale of a geological age. Right, was remarkably 11 minutes. Let's see a bit about Rehab Nazal's work. Yes. Switching to a wholly different chapter now. Forgive me for the lack of a transition. Today, we are living in the dream of the colonizers, writes Adrienne Marie Brown in Emergent Strategy. Palestinian artist Rehab Nazal, who is exiled in Canada, shows audiences this fact with brutal honesty in her works, Canada Park and We, the Wild Plants and Fruit Trees. Canada Park 2015 shows viewers a park in Israel named Canada Park, built over the Palestinian villages of Imwas, Beit Nuba, and Yalu, which Israel destroyed in 1967. In the film Canada Park, she interviews a former resident of Imwas who describes how he can see his childhood home among the vegetation in the park. He recognizes trees and caves as well as the cemetery in the devastating narration over images of this park in Israel in the 1948 territory where Palestinians are not allowed to enter. The sign at the entrance of the park in Hebrew and English states that the park was funded by Joseph and Faye Tannenbaum of Toronto, Canada. This is the colonizer settler dream. Wipe out Palestinian homes, coffee shops, schools, cemeteries, mosques, roads, schools, universities, and cover them in spaces like parks, as if they had never even existed. Yet even in total destruction, Palestinian resistance lives on in the non-human world, in the plants they planted for future generations. In We, the Wild Plants and Fruit Trees, a larger project that includes this film, Canada Park, Nazal created 60 photographs of the depopulated village of Lifta, the villages of Imwas, Beit Nuba, and Yalu. In these images, Nazal shows beautiful blossoming flowers living in the ruins. She states that her intention is to give agency to plants and trees in colonized territories. In these images, we see walls of destroyed, uninhabited buildings with plants growing out of and through the walls. Nazal describes how these plants, planted by some Palestinians, such as almond trees, live on. Ironically, the Israeli government's signage describing the Me Naftoa or Lifta Nature Reserve disallows picking any fruits or plants in the area. Nazal describes how the settlers don't understand that the plants in this area are food and medicine If they're not picked, they will die. The signage describes the site as a biblical site, an archaeological site, and mentions the Arab cemetery in the area. Yet what is ignored is that the Palestinians who built the houses and planted the trees are still alive, and due to the apartheid regime of the Israeli occupation, they're not allowed to return to their land. One of the images from that project. So in this work of the JNF, or in this work in Canada Park, we see this, this ecological rhetoric obviously used in a way to reinforce colonialism and racism. And I think about this similarly to a kind of zoning or, an enforcement of codes on these areas. So you may have seen this diagram that Israel has created a grid of codes and numbers to tell people in certain areas of Gaza to evacuate because they're about to be bombed. Tell them often via text message when they have no electricity and there's no way for them to receive such messages. But I think there's a similarity here with the codes of zoning the land as a nature preserve that people are not allowed to go into, coding these neighborhoods numerically for a AI powered genocide. And essentially using codes and creating an algorithm for a mass assassination factory. Clearly, from Palestine to Mexico, these border walls have got to go, right? But if we act like it is normal to have these border walls that keep people out, those border walls can keep us in, like we are seeing in Gaza. People not allowed to leave, being bombed. I couldn't find the image. I'm not sure if it was Al Jazeera or Democracy Now, but right now, so many people camping, living in tents in Rafah, right up against the border, in the desert in Rafah, right up against the border fence with Egypt, being not allowed to leave. So what I'm trying to think about in this work is if the human has been used as a weapon in this way, if the dehumanization is so blatant that Yoav Gallant says on the news, these are human animals, and that is somehow acceptable, and that is allowed to stand, and they're allowed to continue receiving weapons and aid and support from the US and so many other governments, what other strategies do we have besides saying, I'm human? I think that in my experience of organizing against neo-Nazis in San Diego who called themselves the Minutemen, if someone thinks you're not human, you demanding that I'm human doesn't work. So what other strategies do we see? What else can we do? So I've been really inspired by Wangechi Mutu's work and Zakiya Iman Jackson's writing about that work to think about this. So the term that I'm offering in this talk is Alterhuman, which learns from the alter globalization movement and my time in the alter globalization movement, and writers such as Arundhati Roy, Maria Puid de la Bellacasa, and Zakiya Iman Jackson, who are offering alternatives to posthumanism. I offer alterhuman as a term that rejects the teleology of posthumanism and is based on a decolonial timeline. The alterhuman acknowledges that many groups never had the privilege of being considered human by colonial, legal, and academic institutions, as Sylvia Wynter tells us so clearly in No Humans Involved. Black and Indigenous people have historically been defined as less than human for purposes of enslavement and colonization. The concept of man is a weapon that has also been used against disabled people, queer people, trans people. In Wangechi Mutu's work, I see many examples of this. In Mutu's work, one can see As Zakiya Amon-Jackson describes, one can see the processual, algorithmic operation of a visual field that creates a disruption of the anti-Black logics defining Black female outside the realm of the human. Zakiya Amon-Jackson describes Mutu's artworks in the series Histology of the Different Classes of Uterine Tumors, here, showing that not unlike biological, showing that quote from Zakiya Amon-Jackson, not unlike biological systems, anti-Blackness and spectatorship are reconceived as iterative, processual, interactional systematicity that, while totalizing, is neither absolute nor bound by the spatio-temporalized fiction of foundation or an origin proper to the past, but an open-ended looping indeterminacy, one whose terminus must necessarily remain unknown. Here, describing the process of looking at Mutu's intricate collages. Here's another collage. So in chapter 5 of this book, I'm writing about these two exhibitions from 2023 intertwined, Mutu's exhibition at the New Museum and World Building, which was an exhibition of digital games in Germany. Here, in describing the process of looking at Mutu's intricate collages, Jackson describes how the image does not easily resolve into a face or other body parts, but requires a viewer to continue moving their eyes to different parts of the image, trying to see one face while seeing a different body part. Oh, this is better on the last slide. A different body part, a vulva, a leg, misplaced eyes, in a process that reveals the algorithmic nature of seeing race and gender, and in so doing reveals the process of anti-Blackness. Jackson's articulation of this process as iterative and interactional highlights the way the sociogenic codes embedded into neurological processes that define a face or the identification of race and gender are algorithms that repeat, change parameters across repetitions, and involve interactions between the viewer and the artwork or body being viewed. Further, Jackson shows how these codes defining man, Blackness, and femaleness are not merely anchored in the centuries-old histories defining Black women and disabled people as less than human, but are ongoing processes of looping indeterminacy, quote, again describing a specific algorithmic structure. Algorithms can perform looping operations, but also change the way those operations act over successive passes through a loop, allowing for an indeterminate outcome at the end of the loop. Through Mutu's artwork, Jackson describes a strategy of disruption or disturbance of the accepted operation of the codes that would justify violence against Black women, thus postponing the decisions that might lead to such violence, calling into question the certitude of the categories of man, woman, and human. Wangechi Mutu's intertwined exhibition invites viewers to review or re-envision the limits of humanity and to envision the alterhuman, other than human beings who populate a world unlike any world of the past. This is a hotter world than any seen before. I wrote this in August, so let me say July 2023 has been witness to 3 of the hottest days ever recorded on planet Earth, measured in global mean temperatures. The term I'm offering, oh, I already read that, learns from globalization movements. In the work the show is named after, Intertwined, Mutu creates a direct confrontation with the sexuality of the alterhuman. Mutu has produced an image of 2 chimeric beings with hyena heads and humanoid bodies that could be described as female, one wearing what could be a bra or bikini top and the other with exposed breasts. To call these creatures female is already a reduction of the ways that Mutu challenges onto epistemological boundaries within her artwork. Side note, actual hyenas are known to have intersex biologies, and female hyenas have functional penises. Yet, these creatures Mutu has fabulated are hyena-human hybrids or something else, and don't fit into simple racial or gender categories. One hyena looks directly at the viewer, while the other raises her eyes in an apparent ecstasy or fear as the two share either a strip of meat or a long-tongue kiss. The 2 bodies are touching, one figure with her hand on the other side, the other with her hand perched on her own hip, a model posing for a photo. The creature on the right is covered in a pattern that looks like stars or could be mold. Many circles of different sizes covering her body. She looks at the viewer, challenging them. In Western ethics, it's wrong to see animals in a sexual light, but the being depicted here is undoubtedly posed in a way to be sexualized. Perhaps the work's a commentary on the dehumanization of Black women in popular culture through hypersexualization. The shimmering tension can offer more. Theorists from Sylvia Wynter to Donna Haraway to Bellacasa have argued that humanity's survival in the face of climate crisis depends on how we see the boundaries of the human, the limits of our ethical systems, as well as the limits of our solidarity and empathy. All right, let me get you that quote from Wynter from the beginning. Yes. So, the urgency of climate change has been described by Wynter as a species-threatening event. So here's where Wynter describes that, the place of the human and the referent we. Wynter cites Jacques Derrida's talk, The Ends of Man, in which he applies his deconstructive method to the language of man. Wynter distinguishes between the referent we of man as used by French philosophers and, quote, the human species itself. She calls on readers to see the many struggles for racial, gender, and economic justice as wrapped up in this single issue, saying, the referent we of man and its ends, he implies, is not the referent we of the human species itself. Yet, as he says, this is Wynter talking about Derrida, French philosophers have assumed that as middle-class philosophers, their referent we, that of man too, is isomorphic with the referent we in the horizon of humanity. I'm saying here, this is still Wynter, I'm saying here that the above is the single issue with which global warming and climate instability now confronts us, that we have to replace the ends of the referent we of liberal monohumanist man too, the ecumenically human ends of the referent we in the horizon of humanity. We have no choice. Wynter differentiates between the people signified by the word man in a sense shaped by religion and Western Enlightenment philosophy and the actual extent of human beings, calling to our attention the ways that many groups of people have been dehumanized. Instead, she calls on thinkers and activists to refigure the word human as an action, a verb, not a noun, saying, with being human, everything is praxis. This focus on action, human, is something we do, not something we are. And considering how we make this huge shift towards saving all of humanity instead of only the privileged few from climate catastrophe, Wynter points to the codes that define us. Learning from Frantz Fanon's concept of sociogenesis, she describes, quote, our hybrid sociogenic codes and their second set of instructions. Here, an algorithmic analysis is useful in seeing that if the concept of humanity is shaped by codes, which are both social and biological, those codes are algorithms which can be analyzed and changed. Hacked. Wynter herself states, quote, these are codes that are even able to override, where necessary, the first set of instructions of our own DNA. In this forthcoming book, I consider the codes which currently define the limits of the human and look to artists and theorists who offer strategies to override those codes in order to avert a planetary catastrophe for our species. All our species, plural. I don't want to keep reading. I do discuss other works in the chapter, in particular, Hide and Seek, Kill or Speak, a work that Mutu said is about the Rwandan genocide. I think another clear, beautiful example of an alterhuman creature. And Non, je ne regrette rien, which seems even more non-human to me. I guess one reading of this is a woman kissing a snake, but I think boundaries are not so clear, and there's a lot going on. What do I want to do at 28 minutes? I'm going to go on. Okay. So let me say a bit about some of my own work in relation to these things, and then we can have more of a conversation. Thank you all for your patience. Feel free to stand up and stretch, lay down, have a drink. Okay, so yeah, I wanted to just mention this project since it's in the as advertised, as promised. So Oceanic is a series of works that I worked on, collaboration with a few other artists. I almost said Sylvia Wynter, I wish. Cynthia Ling Lee, Gerald Cassell, Susana Ruiz, and Huey Truong, and Ian Costello. This work is about Natural Bridges Beach. And it's about the essay, Unnatural Bridges, Unsafe Spaces, that Gloria Anzaldúa wrote about this beach. I started this project and I mean, honestly, I don't care if this is being recorded. Honestly, I started this project because like, I want to spend more time with the ocean, more time at the beach. But also, I'd done a previous project about wildfires, and I wanted to shift that to thinking about how climate change affects the ocean and how we see those effects through these ecotonal spaces or environments in between two other environments, like a beach. And I found in Gloria Anzaldúa's essay, it's the first place that I know of that somebody said, hey, trans women should be part of women of color feminism. I do love the speech, and it was the first speech that I took my foster daughter to. And I started this, did the scan of this 3D scan of this bridge with May with me. And then she left. And then this project became really about grief and loss. And with my collaborators, thinking about how do we build new queer, trans, abolitionist futures of disability justice through grief and loss and with grief and loss, even if we feel immobilized. And that's Cynthia on the right, or a 3D scan of Cynthia dancing, and that's Gerald, and that's me. And Susana Ruiz and Huey Truong created the film, the 3D scan and the 2D film. And I think the best outcome or the best demonstration of that was the actual shooting of the work, and just holding space for each other and each other's access needs and each other's feelings while we made this work, to make space for grief and actually make a tiny prefigurative space of disability justice and queerness and transness. We exhibited it last summer at the Leslie Lohman Museum. The installation was called Oceanic Portal. And there were two parts. One part of that was this 2D print that was behind the windows, and then these transparent adhesives. Should we use the lights? Can we put the lights a little lower? Thanks. It's hard to get good pictures of this. The transparent adhesive where you see the 3D scan of the dancers. So, some kind of effect of depth as you walk past on the street. Thank you so much, Raphael. And thanks, Raphael, for all your support. Raphael did so much, emailing, texting, like a lot of amazing work to me. And there's Gerald, and there's an app. So there's an app on the App Store. There's a QR code if you want to get the app. It's free, so that viewers could see the dances on the sidewalk in front of the installation. But also that means you can see it anywhere the hell you're standing, and hear the poems and hear the sound in that project. So here's Cynthia and Gerald and yeah. So we're thinking about this intersection of, loss of capacities to COVID, loss of places to climate change and sea level rise, because in 50 years, this beach could easily be gone. There used to be 3 bridges, now there's 2. Also there's a mention in there of the kelp, because 95% of the kelp in Northern California have been destroyed by warming of the ocean. So I've been thinking about climate change in different ways, and I wrote the sci-fi novel, which leads into the next project, and we have about 11 minutes. Okay. And in this novel, it's about alternate realities. It's asking this question, like, could this love between 2 trans women result in a way to travel in between alternate realities and alternate universes? I'm happy to talk about it if you have read it or have questions. I mean, I'm happy to talk about any of these things. But I didn't want to say a lot about the book because what I wanted to say more about was the artwork that I decided to make inspired by the book, which is called the Probability Engine. I decided that I just want to make that machine to go to other realities. That would be nice. And so I'm making this project envisioning different climate futures. So I have been studying climate tipping points to envision those futures. So working with a handful of really incredible artists, Star Hagen Esquerra is the amazing two-spirit artist who's a 2D, doing the 2D illustrations and concept art for this project. So we worked over most of 2023, like looking at climate science and coming up with ways of making it visible and tangible for people. And we're really focusing on 9 tipping points. The UN report identified more like 15. I think it is 15. But we're trying to focus on 9 and make 9 sculptures and make an augmented reality app in which you can look at the sculpture and see a little chunk of possible climate futures, good and bad, climate justice futures, climate catastrophe futures related to those tipping points. The reason I made this project was because in late 2022, this report by Lenton et al. Said that if we just get to 1.5 degrees of warming, we could start triggering these tipping points. It was the scariest thing I have ever read, and I just wanted to shout it from the rooftops. Like, we're not just gonna have warmer summers and warmer weather. We're like right on the verge of a very serious catastrophe. So in November of last year, we had 1.44 degrees of warming. So if we get to 1.5, we could start tipping these. And if we tip 1, they could tip each other. So what are some of the tipping points we're looking at? I'll show a couple of them. Here is Star's concept sketch for the engine. We did a lot of many different iterations of what this machine to travel to alternate realities looks like. I wanted it to be handheld and organic, and it's really inspired by Yun-Chul Kim's work in the Korea Pavilion at the Venice Biennale last year. And Marguerite Myo, also at the Venice Biennale, also made really beautiful work. But this is we're making a physical 3D printed sculpture from sustainable materials out of this first version of the model, of the engine, sorry. So there's our test print of the probability engine, tiny handheld particle accelerator to take you to an alternate reality. And there's a slightly different angle. And do you want to say anything, Tammy, about the prints? Should I show the other 2, or do you want to say something now? Take it away, please.
Hello, everybody. My name is Tamara Duplantis. I'm a digital media artist and composer, and I am the studio manager for the Critical Reality Studio. And my role in this project that Misha is talking about is making the 3D prints that our wonderful collaborator, Marcelo Fiananeto, is creating to just try to figure out how to take these things and make them into real life. So we have a couple of 3D printers in the studio, and we are trying to print them out using, like Misha said, print them out using sustainable materials. So this one here, so this one here is made using recyclable natural like polyester. It is recyclable and under the right situations is biodegradable. We have better ones, but yes, of course. Yeah, so this was a test print for our probability engine, but we're planning on creating using these other materials. So this is an example of one of the tipping points. This is the permafrost. We have it made out of 2 different materials here. The one on the bottom that looks like ice is one called Free Flow that is created using recycled plastic material. It is specifically medical packaging, recycled medical packaging in the Netherlands. So yeah, so this ice part is made out of that. And then the top level there, which is kind of the dirt above the permafrost, which, surprise, if it starts to melt, then all of that land there goes away. That's not great. But that layer is made out of a material called algix, which is a material that's created using partially using nuisance algae. So they actually go out, harvest this algae that's causing harm to the environment, create it into this material that we can then use. It's also biodegradable. So yeah, it's honestly been a joy working with Misha and kind of creating this work that's kind of deals with just very pressing issues for humanity. My own work deals with like coastal erosion of the Gulf Coast. Again, it's been very fortuitous to work with you. Anyways, you can come back up, Misha.
Great. Okay, we're almost done. To the angle of the permafrost. So go ahead. Yes, yeah, we're making them bigger. Yeah. Yeah, so this is going to be exhibited in Montreal in an exhibition called the Souterrain Festival, which is like in the underground city because it's so cold in Montreal they have to have an underground city, right? And I was like, this is perfect. I will make a work about the permafrost, which is underground. Um, so what is the? Let me go back a little bit. So right, so Star indicated the permafrost with these two icons up here. Do I have a cursor? Yeah. So it might be kind of hard to see. It's like, yeah, it's not the brightest thing, but anyway, this is the permafrost icon, but then this little line thing indicates all the areas where permafrost is. So when I read about permafrost, it was very abstract to me, and I was like, what's that? And then I did a residency in Winnipeg and talked to some scientists studying permafrost in Winnipeg, and it is very alarming. So the whole northern half of Canada is permafrost, all of that land. It's all permanently frozen because of the temperature, the ambient temperature there. So that's what we're visualizing with this sculpture here is that it's ice. I mean, it's not pure ice, but it's frozen dirt. And also this whole northern part of Russia, all also permafrost. So permafrost is one of the later tipping points. It's more like if we get to 3 degrees of warming. But if the permafrost melts, it can release twice as much CO2 as we've already put into the atmosphere. It also is going to release methane, which is much, much worse for the atmosphere than CO2. And in addition, because our global mean temperature is already 1.44 degrees above historical averages, permafrost is already melting in many places. So indigenous Inuit communities like Tuktoyaktuk in the northern part of Canada are literally having their ground melt away from them. Really have a major issue with the city cemetery. Literally, the ground just sliding away because it is already melting in coastal areas. And we see the interplay of these tipping points in that as the sea level rises, it causes more permafrost erosion because the seas then can reach more area and reach the outside area of the permafrost and cause the permafrost to break down sooner. So the other sculpture that we're showing in the Souterrain Festival is we're calling the last piece of Antarctic ice. I could dig up an image for you, but we don't have a 3D print of it yet. Yeah. And the last thing I want to say as we get close to 45 minutes is that we absolutely need a ceasefire now. You may have seen the Guardian article, which I didn't have time to screenshot, but the Guardian printed an article about a study which showed that the genocide in Gaza has already emitted more than 20 countries worth of emissions in the 4 days it has happened. And Israel says they want it to go on for another year. So it's going to be, it's really putting everyone in the whole world in danger. In addition to the fact that Chevron has their drilling platforms off the coast of Gaza, which of course is motivating them to want to control it. So all of these things are connected. And I think oh, no, I have one last slide. um, this is what I'm doing. Aside from our work, my main organizing project is working with Faculty for Justice in Palestine at UCSC. And we are currently, what are we doing? Doing a lot of work to respond to the repression and just climate of fear that the administration is creating, where they're trying to make anyone terrified to even say the word Palestine. And supporting students experiencing repression, supporting students who are arrested at the Regents meeting, and trying to get our faculty association, the Santa Cruz Faculty Association, which is our union, to say anything about genocide. Like, can you even say that we would like the genocide to stop? Because they have yet to say anything in 4 months, which is really egregious to me when so many other unions have done it. So I'd love to talk about anything that I talked about, including your FJP or organizing you're doing here, or anything else. Thank you so much for your time. No.
Thanks for that. That was really interesting and inspiring. And thank you for speaking today to us as well. I can only imagine what kind of day you've had. So thank you. I had a question about time, actually. So you sort of mentioned offhand this concept of maybe like a decolonial way of thinking about time. But it strikes me, and I've often wondered about this, reading people like Sylvia Wynter, where you've got the formulation of man one, man two. So you kind of get this teleological history that permeates. We talk about climate futures as futures. So there's always this kind of linear form. And I was thinking about the work you did on Oceanic. One of the things that always troubles me about digital renditions is the key frame or the frame, and the fact that when you even do LiDAR scanning, you are always having to kind of fragment or create lines, basically. And I was just wondering, how do you interface this question of this persistent kind of linearity or teleology of time with the kinds of decolonial or alter formulations of time that you talk about, for instance, in Times to Come, as maybe multiplicitous or overlapping, already here, both future and present and past kind of together?
That was an amazing question. I think that for me, when I'm talking about the Alterhuman trying to offer something that is less teleological and with a more decolonial view of time, I am thinking about time as multiplicitous. I mean, I think about Chakrabarty in particular and provincializing Europe, talking about, the idea of linear forward progressing time as a Western construction that many other cultures have imagined differently. Time as circular, or Chakrabarty talks about time that can be, in which superhuman forces could intervene and change the flow of time at any moment, and do, according to many people. So, yeah. Go ahead.
Quick kind of follow-up question. just as you were speaking, I was thinking about the portal as well. So like tare, to carry, the idea that you're moving from one space to another. Again, this line. I mean, the figuration of portal compared to, say, transportal. I was just wondering, is that a possible way of thinking differently in that non-linear kind of more messy way?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that I'm interested in AR as a kind of portal, and AR as a thing that kind of brings together and bridges multiple realities, like in the way that Andalua said she wanted to do. And I do think that part of what is appealing to me about AR is that it's not necessarily linear, it's an interactive process where the viewer can repeat things, stop things, see things from different angles. Yeah. Those are great questions to think about for a long time. But anybody else can pick up from that thread. Or any other thread. Maybe I should turn the lights up. We can all wake up.
Come on, folks. I'll just keep asking questions if you don't ask questions.
I'll ask a question with this amazing sound. I mean, honestly, this mic, the sound in this room, I love it so much. I don't have a question. I just want to hear myself talk. No. No, I was thinking about this portals, temporalities, AR, and the many different sort of infrastructures that happen, right? There's the sort of the virtual, there's the concrete, there's the device, there's the network, there's the servers, there's all these things in between, right? So how to think of like those lines in a different way that are traversing different material and abstract realities that always shows us that they were never separate, right? There was never an abstract and a material, they're always material. So maybe you can sort of elaborate on that random comment that I just shared.
Oh gosh.
I think it's like a good way to sort of bridge that, right? I mean, they were never separate.
Yes. I mean, I do. Yeah. I mean, I do think if you like look at any moment of AR happening on a phone, like it is such a complex assemblage and an assemblage of processes, right? So many algorithms happening. Bye, thanks for coming. Good to see you. I mean, also thinking about the Wi-Fi network that your phone is connected to that lets you do the AR. And oftentimes AR is using GPS satellites to get to locate you physically. So many different lines. I think that the Oceanic app is more like using a gyroscope as opposed to previous work I did with GPS. Yeah. Thanks.
Other questions? Yes.
Comments, disagreements, tomatoes.
Hiya, thank you for that talk. Oh, I hear it now. Okay. It's a lot. So I was taken by your project where you're on the beach, and I was hoping that you could elaborate a bit more on the relationship between grief and possibility, and if you find that thinking through grief can be limiting sometimes, or maybe not.
I think that's what you said. Yeah. I mean, I think the possibility in the grief was that there was not much else I could do until I was dealing with So, but also, I mean, it has its own temporality. I mean, I think about, I'm not sure, thinking about like, is an experience of grief and loss also human? Or did it make me feel less human? I mean, what the hell does it mean to feel human, right? um, I can't remember if it's in Jackson or Winter that they say, you know, oh, I think they're quoting Chakrabarty saying that one never feels oneself as human. But yeah, it did feel like being apart from the world. Yeah. So I think there's a possibility there in terms of it making you make time for it. And all that creative possibility that comes out of slowing down. Maybe, yeah. Yeah, thanks. Yes.
You talked about the collaborative nature of that project, and this idea of the possibility of thinking through these futures. And so, and you talked really beautifully about that kind of holding space for each other and each other's needs. And so I just wondered, and it's clear that collaboration seems like a really important part of your process. So I just wondered if you could talk more about what that looks like, feels like, how you hold that.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Yes. Um, yeah, I mean, I think in that case with that project, I think it was important to hold space for each other's grief about different things. And I mean, so much of it was shaped by like just like finding a physical place where all the dancers could access with their different mobility needs. And you know, the timing of it and how long people could actually be on the beach and still have any spoons, still have any energy, you know. Some of my collaborators were dealing with long COVID. And so, yeah, I do think that act of holding space for each other was, like I said, I think the best thing that came out of it. And collaboration's always been really important to my work for sure. I think as somebody who's neurodiverse and has ADHD, I've never been the kind of person that's like, I'm going to sit down for 6 hours and make some art. And it's going to be a perfectly linear process. Or sit down for 8 hours and write a book, or 8 months and write a book. So like having somebody to be in dialogue with is really essential for my process and really amazing. And it's changed a lot over time. I mean, now that I have a research budget, I can hire amazing artists like Tammy to work with me, which is nice. But sometimes it's been working with other faculty in the past, like in Oceanic, it was, you know, faculty member collaboration, which is its own challenge because everybody's so freaking busy. Scheduling becomes really hard. Yeah. Did you answer that question?
Thank you.
Great. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to say thank you. And thank you for presencing Palestine in your talk. I think my question you spoke to a little bit, but it's, yeah, like how do you engage with AI and AR technologies that can be generative and expansive while they're also being used for genocide? I'm like, that's really what I'm sitting there. I'm curious to hear.
Yeah, thanks. I, hmm. There's a lot of ways that I would think about that question. I mean, we can look at laptops and cell phones certainly being used for genocide and used to counter genocide. I actually haven't used any AI in my work. In Scene Soul, I made like a poetic depiction of AI and just kind of performatively describes and vocally performs an AI. What is she? Navigational assistant. But yeah, I do find a lot of AI technology really problematic in a way that I don't want to use it in my work. I'm certainly not like using, you know, image generators or text generators in my work. I don't, yeah. I mean, other artists do, that's great. That's up to them. Um, yeah, I mean, I think that's a good question to just like keep in mind ongoing as to like, what are the ethics of the materials that I'm using? And how can I try to use these tools ethically? I mean, I think, when we think about Audre Lorde and the master's tools, like, I don't think she was talking about machetes. Like, machetes are fucking good for killing slaveholders, I think. I think she was talking about academic hierarchy and division between activists and organizers and feminists as a tool that she didn't want to use or didn't think could be used for liberation. But I also was trained as an artist. I did my MFA in a really conceptual art department with Ricardo Dominguez, and he said to me, "You had the idea. Everything else was icing on the cake." In that department, it was where Alan Capra had come up with happenings. They were like, "You don't have to be good at the thing you're doing. We don't really care. It's like a mechanical process. If you can paint well, or code well, or 3D model well, it just doesn't impress us. What is important to us, and this is what they told me, is like how good are the questions you're asking? How original and novel are the ideas you're coming up with? And how well are they informed by what people have already done so you can actually demonstrate that those things are novel? So I took that to heart in how I make things, and I'm usually driven by conceptual questions, and then the medium comes after. And I also have a short attention span as somebody with ADHD, so I often get really tired of a thing after the year it takes to make an artwork. Like after a year of VR with Becoming Dragon, I was like, I don't ever want to touch that shit again. I guess I have now made 3 AR works in a row, though. That's pretty weird. I'm gonna have to stop doing that. But I have also changed mediums across the 3 projects. So, Oceanic was like AR and film, and Scene Soul was AR and installation. And I'm trying to make sculpture now for the first time, thanks to Tammy. That's great.
So I suspect we're sort of moving towards time, but I had a final question. I'm just thinking about this image here and the kind of climate that we exist in at the moment. And I remember being an undergraduate student and at about the time the Transborder Immigrant Tool was created. And I remember that being a kind of really complex moment where at one hand, it was the moment that I realized that art could actually have a really incredible impact. But also the moment that I realized that if you make art that criticizes, then they will come for you. And I remember the kind of threats to fire Ricardo, even though he had tenure, and the big news media about how this was like, you know, sort of was like a terrorist kind of, although the language wasn't quite there yet, sort of thing. And I'm just sort of thinking, are you able to reflect on that kind of moment and this moment we see now where we're seeing 3 women dragged up in front of Senate committees to account for the actions of their institutions and then losing their jobs, and perhaps what has changed and what hasn't between those 2 instances, I feel like. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. Yeah. All right.
Showing my age here.
Or mine. Huh. Yeah, the Transborder Immigrant Tool was a project I worked with the Electronic Disturbance Theater on. And what were the years? 2007 to ongoing. Yeah, I was doing my MFA at UC San Diego, and Ricardo came to me and was like, me and Brett want to make a cell phone to help people cross the US-Mexico border, because the #1 cause of death is dehydration, and we think that's wrong. That if someone is dying in the desert of starvation or of dehydration, you should give them water, not ask for their papers. So we wanted to make it also recycled materials. So we figured out how to use these Nextel cheap cell phones off of eBay for like $10 that had GPS chips in them. And they asked me to be like the liaison to because I was already like doing all this no borders anarchist activism, and they were like, you already know like Enrique from Border Angels, like can you talk to him and see if we can map out all the places, because there were activist groups in San Diego and Arizona that put these water caches out in the desert for people to find, and they put like a flag in. Yeah, so we made like a functional prototype, and also in terms of including providing physical sustenance, it would provide poetic sustenance. So there were poems of welcoming and hospitality. We translated them into lots of different languages, Spanish, indigenous languages, Nahuatl, Russian, all kinds of languages, and made a working version. Then 3 right-wing Republican congressmen wrote to our chancellor and said that we were guilty of the felony of enticing immigrants to cross the border. And then Glenn Beck put up a picture of me in a keffiyeh. And yeah, I remember them interviewing the Border Patrol and being like, do you think these artists are making a tool that's going to be used by Al-Qaeda terrorists? And the Border Patrol's response was so great. The Border Patrol was like, you know, people already used GPSs to cross the border. You do know that, right? Yeah, so yeah, I mean, I was a grad student at the time, so I don't have the like inside baseball version of that. But they did manage to threaten Ricardo's tenure, and he did have some kind of disciplinary hearing, and he did a lawyer, and there was a FBI investigation, there was a police investigation, there was like a UC internal investigation. They certainly spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to make sure that we properly used the $5,000 they gave us to make this project. And all of their investigations found that we didn't do anything illegal. But they did find, or they did say that if we finished our plan for the artwork and distributed them in Mexico, that would be illegal. So instead, we distributed the code online, and nobody ever got to use this except for one performance artist in the Hemispheric Institute of Performance and Politics who walked across the border with the Border Patrol. Yeah, very proud of that project. I'm very grateful for Ricardo for including me as a collaborator and not just as some like nameless student buried in the credit somewhere. In terms of what is different now, I feel like there's been so many examples of the right wing weaponizing activist language and tactics against us. And the way anti-Semitism is being weaponized is such a clear example of that, which I think like shows the limits of our own politics and strategies. That like, if it's that easy to be like, you're racist, or you're anti-Semitist, shut you down, fire you, then we have created a, to go back to Sylvia Wynter's claims and no humans involved, then we have created that environment that allows that to happen. And I think that means that we really need to rethink our strategies and what we're doing. And it goes so far as to, Gavin Newsom is trying to have the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism adopted for the state government of California, which would say that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism would become legal in California, which many Jewish activists have said is not true at all. And many Jewish activists have said that, in fact, Zionism is anti-Semitism. So, yeah, I think that there's been so many examples of this weaponization of our own language and strategies of protecting certain identities used against us that really just is making me think about how we can rethink things. Yeah. Okay, 2 minutes. Last questions or comments? No pressure. Did you want to add anything, Tim? No. Okay. Apagado.
No, see, ha.
Sí.
Okay, well, we're at time. And I had a terrible question, but I don't want to end with a terrible question after like of this. So I will ask you in private and secret
Okay.
later. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Misha. That was amazing. Thank you for coming and see you at the next one.